Well, I want to welcome everybody to Sunday Morning at the Marxist Library, the virtual library. My name is Gene Rule, and I'm a member of the small but dedicated collective of people that handle the programming and all the mechanics of this. The library here was named in memory of two remarkable individuals, Carl Nebel and Roscoe Proctor, whose book collections formed the core of what became the Nebel-Proctor Marxist Library for Social Research. Carl Nebel was a noted Marxist economist who came to the United States in 1934 after escaping from Nazi Germany. He served in the New Deal and the US Navy in World War II. When he passed away in 1995, he asked that his extensive library of books, pamphlets, and papers be made available to the public, and that it be named after his wife, Elizabeth Hale Nebel, who was a leader in public housing during the New Deal. Roscoe Proctor was born in Texas and moved to California in the 1940s. He had a long career as a farm laborer, longshoreman with the ILWU, and community organizer, mentoring Black youth in Oakland and South Berkeley. He was a member of the Communist Party USA's political committee and served as secretary of the trade union department. Both the collections were moved to Berkeley's historic Finn Hall in 1987, and then were moved to our present location at 6501 Telegraph Avenue in Oakland. Unfortunately, we can no longer accept book donations, but we can advise you on what to do with your old books. There are places that do accept books. About 20 years ago, before I moved back to Berkeley, the Institute for the Critical Society at the Nebel-Proctor Marxist Library was formed to further the library's goals of preserving our written heritage, as well as supporting emerging struggles for racial and gender equality and for socialism. The members of ICSS are active in different aspects of people's struggles in the Bay Area and worldwide. Some of us are affiliated with specific political parties and tendencies, others are not. We respect one another, but we do not necessarily agree on all issues. Accordingly, the opinions expressed in our lectures, workshops, and publications are those of the authors only and do not represent any kind of group consensus on the issues concerned. We are united, however, in our respect for the work of Karl Marx and our belief that his work will remain as important for the class struggles of the future as they have been for the past. And as a group, we continue to draw inspiration from the work of Karl Marx, including his 11th thesis on Feuerbach, that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. And I think our speakers exemplify this motto of Marx and our mission. And to talk more about this, I'll turn it over to Roger Harris. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Gene, and good morning. And before I introduce the speaker, I just wanted to make a little comment about this T-shirt I'm wearing and this particular symbol. Two of my grandparents came from Belarus. This is the national emblem of Belarus. If you're watching the news lately, the mainstream news, you'll be seeing the red and white emblem, which is the emblem used during the Nazi period. That country is now going through a color revolution, and we wish those people the very best, and a fruitful outcome to that. Our speaker today, and I'm very happy to introduce the speaker. He's a biologist by training and a longtime political activist and peace activist. Henry Lowendorf started his peace activism in the mid-1960s. In 2016, he led a peace delegation to Syria. And this was a mission to stimulate the US peace movement to honestly discuss the war in that country. He chairs the Greater New Haven, Connecticut Peace Council and he is a member of the U.S. Peace Council Executive Committee. He also chairs the Peace and Solidarity Commission of the Communist Party USA. Today's presentation will be on the campaign to move the money from military needs, from the military, excuse me, to human needs. And I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you to the library. I want to make sure that you can hear me.
We hear you fine, thank you.
Great. So what I'm going to talk about is basically the elephant in the room and how we get rid of it. The elephant in the room is the vast military budget, and how we get rid of it, at least in one important way, is to develop local organizing to bring people into the discussion. And I'm going to explain why I think this is the way to go, or at least an important way to go, and why we have to focus on the military budget if we're going to satisfy human needs in this country, all of the human needs. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I'd like to share my screen if I can find it. Okay, well, let's try this again. I'm afraid that screen isn't showing up.
Okay, on the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a share screen green button.
Right.
Yeah, click on that one, and it's gonna give you all the available windows you have on your maybe desktop at this point. You may have
the easiest way to find it is to bring that window that you want to share up to the front and then share your screen.
Right. Just let's see if.
Remember, please make it a speaker view.
Let's see if this works. Yes. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Let's. Oh, that's good. Raj, is this working now?
Yes.
Both?
I can see this, but you haven't made it a speaker view.
I thought I did. Just 1 minute. Is this better? I think you need to control it on your end, Raj. Not...
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Right. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Henry.
Thank you. So the issue of the military budget, which I'll get into in more detail. The issue of the military budget is something that almost all of the candidates for elected office, including and especially elected office at a national level, don't want to speak about. They don't talk about it. It is so huge that they ought to be talking about it, but they don't talk about it. And the purpose of this talk is to see if we can generate discussion at the grassroots level that ultimately will force them not only to talk about it, but to vote to cut it and put that money into human needs. We want to make this a campaign issue, but it goes beyond the campaign. This is something that is a long-term project. So drastically cutting the military budget, let's make it a campaign issue. And one of the points I want to make, and this is basic, is shutting down our war economy strikes at the heart of imperialism. I don't think I have to tell this audience what imperialism consists of, but it includes the wars the US is waging abroad. There are many. The Middle East has Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, and there are threatened wars on Iran. And we can expand from that. And in addition, the threatened wars against North Korea, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, or economic warfare against these countries. So these are these are part and parcel of US imperialism and a danger. They're disastrous for the countries involved, but a danger to the whole world. Wars obviously destroy people, economies, cultures, whole civilizations, and are environmentally disastrous. Wars rely on white supremacy, sometimes religious supremacy, sometimes nationalist supremacy. In the case of the United States, all of those are used to generate a war mentality, a support of war mentality, and of course, support for the military budget. And it should be clear that wars target the working class, especially in countries with a majority people of color. Almost entirely, that is the case. The wars, however, also come back and bite us at home in a big way. The militarization of our economy and the militarization of our police are part and parcel of the war economy and the war mentality and imperialism. Let's see if I can get to the next slide there. So one of the major things that the war economy does is it sucks resources from human needs. And our members of Congress and the president are always looking way for cutting the budget, especially since neoliberalism got formalized in the 1980s, except for the military-industrial complex. It survives and thrives and is constantly being fed by our taxes through the Congress and through the executive. So if we're looking at human needs, and I'll go into some more detail in a bit, they are being starved because we're spending so much on a war economy. Let me make one other point, and that is the United States has an industrial policy. The politicians and the media try to deny this. They oppose industrial policy, verbally anyway, but we have an industrial policy. And that industrial policy is the military-industrial complex. It is funneling huge quantities of money into the war machine, into killing here and abroad. And that is a significant economic policy. So despite all of the claims by whatever politicians that there isn't an industrial policy, there isn't a direction that the government is shoving down our throats, it is, and it's killing. So one so important aspect of what we're proposing here is that people in this country are not focused on the wars or the war economy or the massive amounts of money that go into these wars and the war economy. People are focused on their immediate needs and on the needs they see around themselves in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in their cities and towns, and in their states. They see this economic crisis, which for a majority of people in this country, the economic crisis in 2008 did not cease for them. The jobs that were lost were not replaced with equivalent jobs. The housing that was lost was not replaced. The pensions, savings, and so forth that were lost 12 years ago, that has not been replaced for the majority of people in this country. The stock market recovered. The wealthy became even more wealthy. But for the majority, there's an economic crisis that continued for the last 12 years, despite the claims to the contrary. And in this pandemic that we have suffered for the last 8 months, there's another economic crisis that has hit millions and millions of families. the crisis, the economic crisis that hit these families on all levels, food insecurity, housing insecurity, job loss, the inability to go to school, the inability to pay down debt or pay debts or pay bills. And so these are serious economic crises. We have to add to that the crisis that is being exposed more and more, and that is the crisis to white supremacy and the murder of people of color, black people in particular, but Native Americans and trans women and so forth who are targeted. This kind of slaughter is part of the crisis that we face. What we see at the same time, and this has been going on for a long time, it's part of the neoliberal agenda of austerity and privatization, is stripping the public sector. So there are layoffs that are ongoing in the cities and the states. There are layoffs in the federal government as well. Service and pension cuts, service cuts to what we are paying our taxes for, presumably, and cuts of the pensions of government workers. Tax increases, we're seeing the threats and the actuality of tax increases to try to make up the deficits that the states and the cities have. We see further privatization. One obvious example is the post office. And we see deregulation. All of these things are going on that diminish the services we need and diminish all the access to human needs that we have. Here are some of the infrastructure and social needs that the pandemic is accelerating and the economic crisis accelerating in terms of the bankruptcy of cities and states. I won't go through all of them, but you can read clean water and sewage. Clean water is so obvious in Flint and Cleveland and many other places where the water systems desperately need to be rehabilitated. Sewage systems, healthy and affordable housing, people living with lead paint, living with mold, living with leakage and so forth. The roads are deteriorating, especially in the cities, it's obvious. Public transportation, which has been decimated since after the Second World War, is in desperate needs, and all of these other things. And then the social needs, healthcare, it's clear. It's become obvious since the pandemic that people who had healthcare insurance through their jobs lost it all of a sudden when they lost their jobs. And the need for national health care, Medicare for all or something similar, is so important at this point to point out, and it is being pointed out. It is, people's eyes are opening. For those union workers who had good insurance coverage through their jobs, when they lose their jobs, that insurance coverage goes away. And so as the workers in Nevada pointed out to their leaders, not everybody has a good union job with good union insurance, and that has become even more obvious in the last 6 months. Schools. Schools are desperate for a lot of reasons. The pandemic has created desperation. In my town, a fifth or a quarter of the students who are supposed to do online learning can't because they don't have Wi-Fi and they don't have the material needs to do that. And online learning doesn't work for that reason. It doesn't work for a lot of other reasons. It's very difficult. And yet we see in this pandemic that it is exacerbated. Daycare desperately needed, our libraries and so forth being cut back, our parks, the park rangers being cut back. And so all of this is going on. Cutting back instead of enhancing the services. That is part of where where the money is going. It's going to the military budget. So here's a graph that shows what the discretionary budget that Trump proposed and is being passed by the Congress for 2021, starting in October. His request is for $1.3 trillion. Formally, 55% of that will go to the military industrial complex. Formally, 55%, and 45% will be left for everything else, for healthcare, for veterans, for education, for transportation, for the environment, for the EPA, which Trump is decimating, for housing and urban development. All of those things plus more have to share that 45%. In fact, this $741 billion Pentagon budget, which has been approved now by Congress and signed by the president, $741 billion is only about 2/3. Sorry, it's short. It doesn't include lots of money, $500 billion that is hidden. All of the nuclear weapons systems, all of the nuclear weapons are in the Energy Department. They're not included in the Pentagon budget. The CIA's budget that is used for sabotaging other countries and spying on people and assassinations and so forth is not included in the Pentagon budget. War debt is not included. The State Department's efforts. Earlier you were talking about Belarusia and the newest Orange Revolution, the insurrection in Ukraine and Syria and Libya. One can go on and on. These are funded through the State Department and its various agencies. That's not included. So careful studies have shown that there's another $500 billion that goes into the military industrial complex. The total war budget for the United States is not $741 billion, it's $1.2 trillion. That's what we face. And that's what's sucking resources from human needs. So we have a $1.2 trillion total war budget and a $0.6 trillion non-Pentagon budget, 2 to 1. Two-thirds of the discretionary budget, that's what Congress votes on every year, the discretionary budget, goes for killing, goes to kill people one way or another. And while 2/3 of that budget is going to kill people, the candidates that are running for Congress and at all levels don't talk about it. It's just totally censored, it's hidden. They're complicit. They don't want to talk about it. And when you bring it up, often the subject changes, or they come up with some excuses that we'll talk about. So I'm going to look at Connecticut, and I'm also going to look at New Haven, where I live, New Haven, Connecticut, as examples. Now, Connecticut is not the same as all other states in terms of the war budget. Connecticut has more jobs in the war economy than many states, but it isn't the first. It isn't the highest number of jobs. That goes to, I think, California, and Virginia has a huge number of jobs in the military industrial complex and so forth. But this is a good example. One of the things that our members of Congress do every year is they brag about bringing money into the state. And I've given you some headlines here. My Congresswoman is Rosa DeLauro, a very liberal member of Congress. She's on the Appropriation Committee. She's been there for decades. And she's now running for the chair of the Appropriations Committee. So she's more than happy to brag about the jobs that are created with the money that comes in for Black Hawk helicopters, for nuclear submarines, for anything that supports the war economy. And she's not the only one. It's true for Joe Courtney, who's in the district where nuclear submarines are built, and for our two senators and the other Congress people in Connecticut. All of them brag, they crow about the jobs that they're funding with money that goes to killing. So can we deny that there are jobs in the defense industry, in the war industry, in the killing industry? No, we can't. It's clear. But what is denied and what it isn't looked at ever in Congress, or hardly ever, I should say, because I'm going to give some counter examples that give us hope. What is hardly looked at are the alternatives we could have if the same amount of money was spent in the civilian sector for human needs of all sorts. So this is a chart that a professor at the University of Massachusetts, Heidi Garrett-Peltier, and others have put together by research on what other kinds of jobs could be created. And in this chart, the blue at the bottom is the equivalent of the amount that goes into the defense industry, which we call the killing industry. And then these little gray areas are what additional jobs you could have in different sectors. If you were building wind machines, wind and solar, you can see that you would get more jobs. If you were in healthcare, you get far more jobs. And in the center, primary and secondary jobs would be huge out of the same amount of money from the military budget. This is what, when Ocasio-Cortez and others talk about a Green New Deal, what we talk about is a Green Peace New Deal, because the Green New Deal can only be funded if we cut the military budget and put that money into creating jobs in these other sectors. And we're well aware that a machinist or electrician or a plumber who's working in the industries that make these killing machines is not going to take a job as a healthcare worker. But the same people can do jobs in the solar industry, in building high-speed trains, in all of the things that need to be manufactured and could be manufactured in a Green Peace New Deal. So those are opportunity lost. Okay, wait, they say. If you challenge them on jobs, they say, well, we've got national security. We've got to protect ourselves from all of these evildoers abroad. That is the fallback, and sometimes it's the first step. But what are the national security threats to the United States? The United States spends more money on war than basically all of the other countries, including its allies combined. If you just look at the $741 billion, it's more than the next 10 countries combined, which includes NATO countries and includes Saudi Arabia, which is one of the highest spenders on war machinery to keep our military industries in profit. What is security? Well, we've been taken down, this country and a lot of other countries have been taken down by a virus that you cannot blow up with a cannon or a nuclear weapon. You cannot bomb it from a plane or a ship. This virus has taken us down. The United States has the most deaths of any country, bar none. It has the most cases of any other country. So we've been taken down by a virus, and I won't go into that whole issue of public health and so forth, but it's clear that that is a national security threat. And we have been warned that pandemics are a huge threat to us, The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist considers that there are two other threats that are civilizational threats, existential threats to the human race, to the human civilization. One is climate scorching, climate change, and the second is nuclear war. Those two things have driven the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist to move the atomic clock to 100 seconds before midnight. It's the closest to disaster that atomic clock created in the 1950s, closest to disaster catastrophe that it has ever been, because of the two threats. Pandemic might not be the same level of threat, but it has certainly devastated economies around the world and health around the world. The national security of the United States. So that first world map shows the COVID-19 results, where the United States and Brazil are at the top of the list. And then there are a number of other countries in Latin America that are moving up quickly, and India, which is also moving up very quickly in the numbers of people who have been quite sickened, and a number of countries in the Middle East, as well as Southern Europe. So it's not poor countries alone, it's poor and rich that are suffering. And that is, to me, that is national security. A pandemic that largely could have been controlled and much of it avoided was allowed to continue because of basically imperialist thinking. We also have another map here showing US foreign bases. United States has not 10, but 100 times as many foreign bases as other countries. The United States has over 800 foreign military bases. And those bases are the forefront of waging war. They're the forefront of intimidating countries. They're at the leading edge of killing and mass destruction. That is a national security threat, having those bases. It's a global security threat. We need to get rid of those bases. Obviously, there are other security threats. Safe water, not having safe water is a security threat. Worrying about whether the lettuce we buy is contaminated with salmonella is a security threat. There are a lot of them. War, we're not really threatened by any country around the world except defensively. They threaten to defend themselves. North Korea threatens to defend itself, both economically and militarily. That is the threat. If the United States isn't offensive, North Korea does not have to be defensive. If Russia is not being surrounded by NATO bases and US bases and having missiles put up against its border and tanks, it is not threatening us, but it threatens to retaliate. And the same is true with China. They threaten to retaliate. That's the threat. The United States is the primary aggressor. So we have to be really clear about what national security is and what it isn't. So these are the issues. All of this money being spent on killing, and all of that money being sucked from the things that we really need. Now it sounds dire, and it is in some respects, but I also think that what's important, and the point of this whole webinar, is to show that there are ways out of this that are practical. Where is the hope? Where are the handles? Where's the leverage? So there's exceptions to the silence. So it's not 100%. The silence of the candidates, the silence of our members of Congress. Barbara Lee and others, Bernie Sanders, introduced into the House and the Senate a proposal to cut the military budget by $74 billion. That's 10%. Now, 10% perhaps is what the Pentagon loses under the carpet every year. It doesn't pass an audit, so nobody knows where it goes. Well, we have some ideas. It goes into various pockets that have nothing to do with what even the Congress considers national defense. It's simply corruption. But $74 billion to cut the military budget. and 125 members of the House. There are 435 members of the House, and 125 voted yes, cut the military budget by 10%. That is exceptional. That is an exceptional vote. It lost, of course, but there were a lot of members of Congress who said, yeah, we can easily cut 10%. They won't miss it. And that's an important step, a very important step. In the Senate, 23 senators voted for that, including the 2 senators from the state of Connecticut. Imagine that. They voted for it. They have not voted against a defense budget, in my experience, ever. But they voted for that 10% cut. That is a step forward. We have to take that and use it. The final National Defense Authorization Act, there were no's. 43 members of the House, all Democrats, voted no on the $741 billion. And 14 members of the Senate voted no. 9 Democrats included, 1 independent, Bernie Sanders, and 4 Republicans voted no on that final defense bill. Well, they have different reasons for voting no. We understand that. But let us take that and work with it. We can take that and we can have a conversation about it. We can find out why. Something even more dramatic took place in the House this summer. And that is that Barbara Lee from California and Mark Pocan, representative from Wisconsin, proposed a $350 billion cut in the military budget. That's half, or almost half. Almost a 50% cut in the military budget. That was never voted on. That was never brought up. And if a 10% cut loses, one would expect a 50% cut to lose too. But the fact is that it was introduced. And even more important going forward is that the same 2 people have introduced a defense spending reduction caucus, a permanent caucus of the House that would work on reducing this war budget, would work on making money available for human needs. The other thing that's important to realize is that the Poor People's Campaign that Reverend Barber and Reverend Theo Harris are promoting around the country is that part of their platform calls for the same $350 billion cut. $350 billion. And what's also important to realize is that the Poor People's Campaign has been endorsed by mainstream organizations like the NAACP and the union, the Service Employees International Union, and others. They have endorsed the Poor People's Campaign. So here are opportunities to look at the endorsers of the Poor People's Campaign and identify those national endorsers that have local organizations or state organizations that we can reach out to and have a conversation with. So these are conversation starters. Let's talk about that. Furthermore, on a national level, the U.S. Conference of Mayors in 2017 and previous and subsequently has voted on city resolutions, on resolutions. The mayors, U.S. Conference of Mayors, cities over 30,000, a lot of cities, have voted to cut the military and fund their cities. And in 2017, they voted on a resolution that said, let's have public hearings on cutting the military budget in our cities. They haven't acted on it, but they voted that resolution. Here's a conversation starter with your mayor. You can start that conversation. Your mayor was there and voted for this, unanimous votes in most cases. Voted for it. Let's do that. Let's start that conversation locally. And then there are city resolutions, and I'm going to come to that, where cities around the country are tackling this issue. People are organizing at a local grassroots level to build coalitions, to call for resolutions, call for public hearings, call referendum to put on the ballot locally that call for cutting the military budgets. All of this is going on. And then there is a national coalition that is being founded, has been founded recently, called Money for Human Needs at moneyforhumanneeds.org, that's providing huge numbers, huge links, resources, information, articles, and so forth on this whole issue of cutting the military budget. How do we go about it? And of course, there are some mainstream calls for defunding the Pentagon. There's one in the Scientific American, which is a popular science magazine, a magazine for educated but mainstream people. So that's happening, it's broadening. And this is something we have to build on. We have to build on if we're going to stop imperialism by cutting the military budget. So talking about some of these local resolutions, New Haven has passed several resolutions calling to cut the military budget. This year, it has a referendum that the Board of Alders, our city council, has voted on, a referendum that will be on the November ballot in New Haven. It's a non-binding referendum, yet it's a good poll. It's a good way to have a discussion with people, our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues, our co-workers, our family that live in the city, to have a discussion with people who are political and people who aren't political. This will be on the ballot, and we have an opportunity to talk with them about it and raise the issue which isn't being raised in the media, and it's not being raised by the candidates, the military budget, the killing machines. So this happening in New Haven. Charlottesville has passed a resolution. Milwaukee, Nevada City, California, other cities have passed resolutions. New York is in the process of building a coalition. It has a number of members of city council on board to pass a resolution in the biggest city in the country calling to cut the military budget. If you live in a city in this country, you can move this process. The campaign called Money for Human Needs is looking for you to join and participate in this whole thing. Let me just say, as a member of the exec of the U.S. Peace Council, this is a coalition. This is an initiative of the U.S. Peace Council, but it's much bigger. It has the support of national peace groups and other groups. So it's it's something that I urge everyone to get involved with. If you're concerned about human needs in this country, you have to be involved in cutting the military budget. I've already mentioned at the national level, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the Poor People's Campaign, the Lee and Pocan House resolution, the caucus, the Green New Deal. Again, we want to call it the Green Peace New Deal because they have to be linked. So here's an example of what we could have in New Haven, a city of 130,000 people, with the money that now goes to the military in our taxes from New Haven. And this information you can get for most cities or congressional districts or states from around the country. You can get this at nationalpriorities.org. They have the conversions for you. Just find them. So what could we have in New Haven? For the $164 million that goes to the Pentagon through our taxes, we could have all of these things. We could have 2,300 families getting a $1,200 monthly relief payment for 1 year. And we could have 590 infrastructure jobs for 1 year. And we could have 300 elementary school teachers' salaries paid for 1 year. And we could have 9.6 million N95 respirators for the city for 1 year. And we could have 700 university scholarships for 4 years. That is huge. This is all huge. These are the trade-offs, because you could have all of these things for the amount that goes into the military budget. Okay, so you could have half of this if you cut the military by half. But this is what we have to work with. And this information we can use. So what's the point? This is what I've been talking about. War and killing is at the heart of imperialism. Military spending is at the heart of imperialism. We have to force this discussion. It's not taking place unless we create it as active members of trying to change the society, active political people, as organizers, as mobilizers, as people with a vision. We have to force the discussion. We have to reach out to people that we know and people we don't know who are candidates or elected officials, leaders of organizations that are dealing with human needs. You can create a resolution. The tools are there. You can mobilize your community. It takes effort. It takes will. It can be done. And we can organize a revolution in the meantime as part of this, if you have nothing better to do. And who has nothing better to do? So I have references here. I can send this PDF to the organizers of this forum. The references cover what I've talked about, but also cover the some of the things that are related, sanctions, economic warfare, and so forth, and environmental consequences of the U.S. Military machine. So that's it. We have to raise the conversation about the military budget and the fact that it could supply the money and the resources we need for fulfilling all of the human needs, all of our infrastructure and social needs of our cities and states in our country. It could supply most of that, and we have to tackle it, and we can. We have the means to do it. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Harry. So, Roger, do you want to say something before going to Jean? Jean has some things to say before we get to the Q&A session.
Please turn it over to Jean. Thank you.
Okay, I'm on.
Mm-hmm. You are on.
Well, thank you very much, Henry. I listened very carefully because I usually like to say something critical about speakers and what you've talked about, but I can't find anything I disagree with. So I will have something to say later on, but first we need to make a few announcements. And is Richard Fallenbaum on?
Yes, he is. He needs to unmute himself.
Okay, well, and he also needs to put that little blurb, there he is, on the chat to tell people.
I will add right now. It's my usual pitch for donations. Please send them. We have expenses. The library has expenses. We're trying to keep it going. And I know some of you have already contributed twice since this COVID-19, and some people haven't contributed at all, of maybe just occasional visitors. But you know, we welcome good donations from everybody. We need donations from everybody. We're still below our budget, and we would certainly appreciate any donation that you can give. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And yeah, I always say we don't need a lot of money, but we do need some. And as we move into the cyberspace, which is so big, we need to actually spend money there. But let me move on. I just want to make a few announcements. We have some good programs coming up on August 30th, the past and future of U.S. policing. We'll have Tony Platt, who is a noted criminologist and historian at UC Berkeley, I believe. He will speak on the past and future of U.S. Policing. September 6th, Labor Day weekend, we're going to have a group discussion before and after November 2020. We're all, I'm sure, concerned about that. And then we're going to have David Bacon, who many of you know. He's agreed to talk on labor and immigration. So we have some good programs coming up, I hope, and you can check out our website, ICSSmarks.org, for our future programs as well as recordings of our past programs. And so I'll have more to say later on, but I'll turn it back over to Roger.
Yes, well, thank you, Gene. And Richard, if you could put up where people could donate, that would be helpful, because
Okay.
that's the best way to get donations.
It's up there now. It should be up there now.
Okay, so that should be on the chat right now if you look on the chat. I don't see it there yet, but it should be getting up there. And so, Henry, thank you for really an excellent presentation. I was expecting an excellent presentation. I certainly was not disappointed. From now on, then we'll have a Q&A. Typically, the Q&A will take the form of people get 2 minutes to either make a statement or make a question, or a combination of both. And then the speaker can either respond or stack the questions and such. So right now I'm looking for hands for people who would be interested in asking a question. So either that or raise your hand if you're on video and I could see you, but I am looking for any questions.
Just an intervention there. If you are on the video, the way to raise your hand is to go to the participants window. When you click on the participants at the bottom of the Zoom, and then there at the bottom, there is a raise hand option. So you can do that. And also you can lower your hand if you don't want to speak. If you are on the phone, you can do it by *9 by raising your hand, and we'll put you on a stack and let you speak in that stack. Then we are going to be lowering your hand if you are on the phone. Thank you.
Right. I do not see any hands, right? Oh, no. Gene, if you would, please.
Okay, I really want other people to jump in, but let me just say a few things. You know, I really liked the talk. It was very good. And I want to add a kind of personal note because, you know, from Veterans for Peace, an organization that's dedicated to the abolishment of war. And I joined the Marines back in 1957. It wasn't the brightest thing I ever did. It wasn't the dumbest thing either. But me and the Corps quits now. I got out in as an enlisted person in 1960 and didn't think much more about it. But, you know, working with Veterans for Peace, you know, I see what's happened to people who've been in combat. And, you know, I may be an atheist, but I still thank God that she never sent me into combat, because I've seen what combat does to people. We have one guy who's Maurice, big black guy, nice guy, but he was in the Marine, he was in Vietnam, and he, in the thick of combat, and he survived. And he got out of when after his discharge, it didn't hit him for 10 years. He was back at work and so forth, and then it hit him. And he just changed. He lost his job, he lost his wife, he lost his family, he lost his home. He was homeless for about 10 years, working through all this basically crap until he you know, came out of it. He got his act together, and he's you know, very active with deported veterans and other veterans that have been, you know, really have the days of war. And I really admire him so much, and everybody in our little group, these Vets for Peace, has some who's been in combat, you know, suffers from it in one way. One fellow, Fred, was in the Air Force, and he was a navigator for B-29s during Vietnam, and he just sat there navigating, but the mission that he was on a weekly basis was to be prepared to deliver an atomic attack on the city of Vladivostok in Russia. And, you know, that weighs on him. He just thinks back about that, the kind of thing that he would have done had they been called to do this. So I just want to say there's a real cost. There's a real cost to the people who are involved with this. And as I say, I just thank God I wasn't one of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. Henry, would you like to comment, or should we go on to the next question?
Let me just say that Veterans for Peace is an outstanding organization, takes excellent positions. I'm a member, even though I was never in the military. I feel honored to be able to do that. The Vietnam Veterans Against the War is another excellent organization. It puts out a newsletter that is hard to put down. I read articles from these veterans of the war on Vietnam, and I weep. because of what they went through. It is very moving. And the Iraqi veterans, now called About Face, I think that the veterans have a special, they have a special place in the peace movement because people listen to them because they have been on the front lines one way or the other. So I think it's very important to support the various Veterans for Peace groups. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Joseph, would you like to ask a question, please, and unmute yourself?
Yes, Henry, New Haven is a peace messenger city. It has a city of New Haven Peace Commission. It also had a similar referendum that is about to be that will take place in November. And could you comment a little more on these accomplishments of the peace movement in now? I would like to remark that Joel Fishman is in the audience. He chairs the City of New Haven. She's the acting chair of the City of New Haven Peace Commission, which was instrumental in getting the Board of Elders to accept unanimously this referendum question. So a little more detail on the struggle for peace in New Haven.
Thank you, Yusuf, for that question. I have to say that New Haven is unusual because as Yusuf said, New Haven is a peace messenger city with the United Nations designation. There are hundreds of cities around the country, around the world, but not too many in the United States that are peace messenger cities, chosen because they've done some outstanding work on behalf of peace. The City of New Haven has a peace commission. It's like the fire commission or police commission. It's part of the city, and it has a small budget, and it has rules and regulations for joining and what it can do. And it has been a leading organization in the city and around the country in moving peace issues. This is very, very important for this city. But you don't have to have these special designations, either as a UN designation or as something that took place over a long period of time to create a special commission of the city, although I think it's a good idea for other people to think about and try to do. You don't have to have such designations in order to get resolutions into and past your city council. You have to have the will, and you have to organize. And I like the example of New York City. New York is the biggest city in the country, and the Queen's Peace Council, it's the local member of the U.S. Peace Council, the Queen's Peace Council, took on this project and went out and talked to leaders of various organizations, social justice organizations and so forth, unions, and got them to join together and promote a resolution in the city council. And this is, to me, this is huge. This is the way to do it. In New Haven, we already had very good relations with members of our city council, the Board of Elders. We already had a peace commission. We had all of these things in place that we could utilize. So in some ways, it was much easier. But this year, the need and the will was there to reach out to many organizations to testify on behalf of the referendum. It's a resolution, but it puts a referendum on the ballot to testify. And we've had city department heads in the past testify what they could do with the money that came from the military budget if it were in their hands. And surprising to me, I thought the department heads would be, say, well, I got to do something else. But no, they saw it as an opportunity to think about how they could actually do their jobs without the budget cuts, without being starved. We have to look at this opportunity. We have to look at this huge opportunity to raise what is to me, the most important issue in the world today, and that is stopping the wars and the threat of nuclear catastrophe, and using the enormous sums of money for the things that we need. That to me is the most important thing. So we've been able to do it in New Haven a number of times. We continue to do it. We continue to build the coalition in New Haven that wants to see cuts in the military budget. And eventually I think we're going to break through to our members of Congress and convince them there is a better way. That's really where we have to go with this grassroots effort. Over.
Right, there is a better way. Next person I'm calling on is Richard Fallenbon, and after Richard, Alan Miller. So Richard, if you would.
Yeah, thank you, Henry, for your excellent presentation. I noticed you mentioned my own congressman, Barbara Lee, and it's true that she's and the other congressperson whose name I don't remember, but I used to be a big supporter of Barbara Lee. But in this question of military, it's a little bit tricky. I find that the big issue recently has been sanctions against Russia and China. And, every congressman, including Barbara Lee, and I'm sure the other congressmen, Elizabeth, Alexandra, AOC, have all voted for these resolutions. They're all on board. It astonishes me. Every congressperson, without exception, in some of these resolutions, actually not resolutions, they're acts of Congress and are signed into law, war resolutions. These are war resolutions. And this is the central issue that's being forced on the public. Russia, China, so forth. We have to fight them. We have to resist their interference and so forth. And they all fall in line. And I think they need to be called to account, no matter what they say. In a way, Barbara Lee and the other congressmen calling for a reduction in the military budget is sort of a throwaway thing. They know nothing's going to happen, and the leadership of the Democratic Party doesn't care whether they come up with these resolutions, but they do insist that they vote for these bills. That's the important thing, and we need to break away some people from that consensus, from the anti-Russia, anti-China consensus, which is a war consensus. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Henry, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, actually I do. I think it's a
Please
really
do.
good point that you raised, that even people who have been heroic in some ways have fallen into line. And I have a rather colorful phrase for this. If you swim in sewage, you're likely to swallow some, even if you're swimming upstream, even if you're fighting it. So I think that what has happened is that these people like Barbara Lee and others have swallowed some of this sewage. I think it's a struggle that we have to make with them. We have the same thing. It's across the country. I'm remembering the scene at Trump's keynote address. The only time that Nancy Pelosi applauded, she stood up and applauded when Trump introduced Guaido.
Juan Guaido.
The person that Trump has chosen to be president of Venezuela. And she stood up and applauded. This is abominable. That that indicates to me that the sense of the understanding of imperialism is very limited, even for these anti-war people, even for Sanders and AOC. Some people have taken some very progressive, very positive positions on many things. They still feed into this imperialism, which is, you know, war by the sanctions and the demonization of a variety of countries that don't kowtow to the United States. They buy into it. And so it's another struggle, and it's part of, it's not separate, it's part of it. It's hard. It's so hard. I see it in my own Senator Chris Murphy, who's taken some forthright stands against the US funding of the bombing of Yemen, and yet supports the Ukrainian coup, and supports the Belarusian coup, and supports all sorts of things like that. There are lots of contradictions, and we have to recognize that. And just as, you know, as was introducing this whole webinar, the members of this wonderful library support Marxism, but don't agree on everything. And we won't agree with all of these people on everything. So it's a fight and a struggle that we have to wage. I'm doing it constantly. The Peace Council is doing it, but it's something we have to recognize, that even people who are very friendly with us on one count are not friendly with us on others. I could say about, for example, I could say about my own Congresswoman, Rosa DeLauro. On local social issues, she's a champion when it comes to social needs. She's just out there, and she's very vocal and so forth, and she's loved by her constituents. On war and foreign policy, I would say she gets a 99% bad record, an F. So this is a struggle we have to wage. We have to support people on those issues we agree with, and struggle with them over the issues we don't agree with. Over.
Well, thank you. That metaphor about swimming upstream through sewage is kind of distasteful, but a very, very good explanatory metaphor. Alan, I was going to call on you next. Did you want to comment, or some of the issues have already been covered for you?
Well, Richard actually brought up the point that I was going to bring up. I'm also in Barbara Lee's district, and I would amplify what Richard was saying, in that not only does Barbara Lee and other progressive, quote unquote, members of Congress support sanctions, but they also echo the anti-Russia narrative. And I don't follow a lot of what she says in all these issues, but I'd be interested what she has to say about Venezuela and Iran and places like that. It seems to me that the thrust of the political thrust of focusing on the progressive Democrats and legislative approach really, I think it just not only has limitations, but can really be a diversion away from other approaches, something like the Black Alliance for Peace, maybe more grassroots initiatives that really more clearly bring out the role of imperialism, and also expose the role of the Democratic Party as the pillar of imperialism in this country. So I'd like to get your comments on that, and from others.
Henry?
I agree. I think that we cannot be diverted, but we also can't ignore the possibilities. The whole point of my essay today was grassroots organizing, raising an issue that is critical to human survival, raising that at the grassroots level, because it's covered up and it's hidden. So that's really where I'm coming from. And in the process of doing that, we can expand what we talk about in terms of what war is, an economic war, and the demonization of Russia and China. They're wonderful scapegoats. The United States is great at finding scapegoats for its own failures and for its own disasters. So they've found them. And these are, in fact, economic competitors. China in particular is an economic competitor. It's very clear to me the reason China is being targeted is to reduce that composition. The United States, monopoly capitalism likes monopolies. It's very straightforward. It doesn't want that competition, and China reflects competition. We don't have to agree with everything that China is doing to recognize what the United States is doing is horrendous, because it's leading us into war, into confrontation. The United States is failing as an economic powerhouse, and so its power is its war muscle. But I do think while I am very much involved in promoting grassroots efforts, which is again the point of my discussion, we can't ignore what's happening with friends, even though they don't agree with us on everything, and we don't agree with them on everything. We can't ignore what they're doing and the power that they can bring to bear. Maybe it's symbolic, but maybe it's more than symbolic. We have to change, we can take down the statues and that doesn't cost the capitalists anything. So it's symbolic. But there are things that will cost, and that's where they're going to fight. And that tells us where we have to fight. So I agree with what you said, but this is a battle on all fronts, and we have to figure out where we put our efforts at any given time, but we can't ignore that we can't ignore our flank, we can't ignore the center, to put it in war terms. Not a very good thing for a peace person, but I think it's graphic. We have to look at this strategically. Over.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Raj, did I see your hand up?
Yes.
Raj, say hi, please.
Okay, thank you. First of all, Henry, thank you very much for a very informative and focused presentation. I learned a lot from it. My experience in this country, I came as an immigrant, 1966, so Vietnam War was just heating up with more draftees going, and then they developed a anti-war movement. And the anti-war movement actually did help end the war, although the larger share goes to Vietnamese heroic struggle and help they got from the socialist Russia and China at that time. But it was helpful. I mean, the anti-war movement was effective. And so we can learn from there. And as you point out, it is a combined, this is a class struggle, which with this focus on war industry because that is the edge of imperialism, ability to dominate others. But here's the difference between 1970 and now, is that up to that time, at least the organized labor was beneficiary of imperialism. The guns and butter policy was possible. And after Reagan changed this and investment in China, so the job losses here, that is no longer true. Unfortunately, the benefit of it went to a right-wing demagogue like Trump, because as Alan pointed out, the Democratic Party is as much, if not more so, I think it's even more of an imperialist party. They both are. So the question becomes, at this point, how labor and now Black Lives Matter struggle for social justice, that is more encompassing. And then this can be combined, because together they can have a force. So that's one thing I'd like you to address. One quick comment about Gene thing, war is hell, is I think war depends on what are you fighting for? Because Vietnamese also fought that long war. That society did not become dysfunctional. Soviets fought the Germans, horrible war. I mean, they did not become dysfunctional. They had big losses, a lot of hurt in their society. Every member of a family, one member of every family lost their life, but they still build a healthy society. The
10
problem
seconds.
here is that everybody knows, the soldiers know, American soldiers know that they're not fighting for such justice. They are in fact are on the oppressor's side, and as a human being, they are not dehumanized. The war is dehumanizing them. Because American workers and soldiers who go there are good people by and large, but they have to fight this bad war. So please comment on this. Thank you.
Well, on the second point, I couldn't agree more. The draft is over, but the poverty draft is on, and we've seen it. We've seen it with our own comrades in New Haven, young men who don't have a job, can't afford school, and they say, "I need a roof over my head and 3 squares, and so I'll join the military." And we've been able, in some cases, we've been able to dissuade them, but it's not easy because what do we have to offer? It's not easy. And the question of labor, I think that, and organized labor, I don't think the leaders of organized labor for the most part have recognized that imperialism is their enemy. I think, even through the Vietnam War, there were some mixed results because there were people in labor who joined us in demonstrating. But I think that organized labor now, I don't see the leadership taking an anti-imperialist position, and in some cases still working with the CIA, even though I think that was supposed to have been stopped, but they're still working with the CIA. In the 1980s, the head of the Machinists Union, William Wimpesinger, the international president, led an effort for conversion, to convert the military companies, the companies building these weapons of killing, to convert them into civilian production. He led that effort, and it was becoming very effective. That effort died along with the Soviet Union and the peace movement in the United States in the early 1990s. And it hasn't been revived. Now, we've tried in Connecticut and we've had limited success. I would say, we had 1 step forward and 1 step back, so we may be back where we were. We've had limited success in generating a discussion about how we could provide these alternative jobs. The environmental movement has been much more successful in coalescing with the trade union movement. There's the Blue-Green Alliance. There are other things. There's a roundtable in Connecticut on environment and jobs with labor people. And the goal there is to move labor, organized labor, from working on areas that are regressive environmentally, like the oil and gas industry, into the solar and wind and public transportation, et cetera, industries. That's going strongly in Connecticut. In Colorado, they passed legislation to deal with coal workers who are losing their jobs, to support them between losing their jobs in coal and finding other jobs and so forth. I think these things are very possible. I think the Green New Deal, or we say what I've said several times, the Green Peace New Deal, is an important initiative, because converting from a fossil fuel and nuclear fuel based energy society to one that is based on sustainability and non-polluting, or at least much less polluting industries, that kind of conversion is applicable to converting. And we have to struggle, and we're doing it with our trade union leaders, our trade union brothers and sisters on these issues. It's not easy. I can tell you from firsthand experience, it's not easy. You have a job, it pays good benefits, it's good wage. Are you going to trust someone who said, well, we're going to give you a job somewhere else, maybe? And we have to be clear. The trade unionists, union members, rank and file have been burnt. And so they want to be pretty certain that they're not going to lose their houses or be unable to send their kids to college or whatever it is, based on promises. They want to see it happen. And I think we can do that, but it's a big struggle, and we have to be aware of it and keep in our minds what this is about. It is about conversion. After the Second World War, almost instantaneously, because the demand was there and the money stopped flowing to build ships and tanks, the war industries, which had been built up so quickly, converted very quickly. It can be done. If there's the will, it can be done. We have to create that will. Over.
Okay, thank you. Really encourage folks to raise their hand and ask questions. So please do. And while you are formulating questions to ask, I'm going to call on Joe Jamison. Joe is also involved in the Move the Money campaign. He's activist in New York City, long-time activist, and he's also on the executive committee of the U.S. Peace Council. So Joe, maybe you could share some of your insights into this issue.
Okay, can people hear me? Yep. Thanks, Roger. I'd just like to underline and maybe build on a couple of points that Henry made with his very fine presentation. Several people raised the question of what do we do with liberal allies who have taken, who are imperfect, such as Barbara Lee. I think the thing that we are proposing with our Money for Human Needs campaign is that we don't leave it to them, and that we build up grassroots pressure from below. That's the whole idea. We cannot rely on their social conscience. Given all the other pressures on them, it's going to take heat from below on even the better members of Congress to get them to budge. And we saw it in the, even though Lee and Mark Pocan, who's the other co-leader of this new defense spending reduction caucus, and who led the way in the last few months with calls for slashing the Pentagon budget by 1/2 and then the 10% cut. A lot of the people who voted for their amendment ended up voting for the final defense budget. So there was a leakage even then, if you will. So we have to create, I think the job of the peace movement is to create pressure from below. And there's another element which I think maybe was understated, although it was implicit in Henry's remarks, which is that we are really in, there are some new objective factors working in our favor that are absolutely unprecedented. And that is, if we are, if the federal military budget, be it 750 billion or 1.3 trillion, however you measure it, it's sitting there, and all levels of government right now are experiencing the greatest deficits that they have ever experienced since the Great Depression. And there is going to be, and it's going to be hitting us like a hurricane over the next 6 months, a desperate search for revenue. And if we allow the dominant forces in Congress to do what they usually do, they will impose austerity on the country. In fact, they're already doing it. Our job is to make them go after the Pentagon budget. And I see it as a stark choice. Either the country is clobbered with austerity as the paying for this COVID economic crisis, the likes of which we've never seen before, or we start to cut the Pentagon budget. So I think we ought to frame it that way, and we ought to act on that, act that way. So I'd encourage you all to take a look at the website that Henry mentioned, moneyforhumanneeds.org. It's, I think it's one of the most splendid websites I've ever seen. A colleague of ours, Baman Azad, who an outstanding peace activist, designed it over the summer, and we're adding to it all the time, and we're building up a committee. We already have some folks from California who are working in their local areas. Nancy Price from the Women's International League, and Tony Ryan, a fellow from San Francisco, and others. We need more people to do this work. It's grassroots work. It's hard to do in a pandemic when you're doing everything by Zoom calls, but presumably that won't last forever. So I just want to thank Henry for a very useful, and I'm very eager to get the recording of his presentation, because I know a whole lot of people I want to send it to.
Right.
So,
thank you, Joe. And we will have that recording posted early in the week, Monday or Tuesday, so that will be available on our website, so that you'll be able to get that. Mehmet, is there anything else I should add about the recording, or is that?
No, you're right. As soon as possible. I think by Monday we should have the site up, and we'll publish that also on our site that Eugene maintains.
And speaking of Eugene, I believe he has his hand up. So Eugene, please take the floor. Unmute yourself. I don't
myself, and I will show myself. But I do want to give anybody who hasn't spoken a chance, but there is one issue that's extremely important, I think, and that is, Pentagon is not the only source of funds. How much money is going to the top 1%, the ruling class? One of our slogans when I was a candidate for Congress, the slogan was always tax the rich and end the wars. And these are a dual thing that's sucking so much money. So not only money, but resources from our society. And I think my feeling is the two should be tied together. And unfortunately, I haven't heard anybody talk about that. So Henry, do you want to comment on that?
Right. We need to make that point. I didn't make that point because I was focusing on how we're organizing. And by the way, we created in New Haven a Tax the Rich party back in the 1990s and ran candidates for state government that, actually didn't do so poorly. The point you're making is we need to make that point, but we have to figure out exactly how do we bring it in to the discussion. Because if we're trying to stop wars for economic, political, and moral reasons, we have to focus some effort on that. We understand that the top 1% are in fact driving the war economy. They make money from it. They benefit from it in lots of ways. The monopolization. If they can defeat China without a war, preferably, I think they don't want to, most people, most of the people, 1%, most of the ruling class don't want a war with China and don't want a war with Russia. They want those countries to just basically give up without a sigh. So they would prefer that, but they're prepared to go to war. And in preparing to go to war, they at the same time may cause it, whether they want to or not. So it's a very dangerous situation. I don't have a simple way. I don't have a simple way of combining these issues. And I agree with you, it's the same thing. It really is the same thing. Is the ruling class versus the rest of us. I think you can bring it up in conversation when it's appropriate, but we don't have a movement in this country, and we haven't seen one that has grabbed people that says not just tax the rich, but eliminate the rich. After all, Franklin Roosevelt had a maximum income proposal in his budget in 1942. 1943, something like that. $25,000 would be the maximum income. Any income above that would be taxed at 100%. That's a hell of a thing to come even from Roosevelt. It would be great to have those discussions. And I would like not to be leading that movement. I'll be happy to join with all that I have, but I don't know that I can lead it. And so we need to have people who can take that on and build on that. But I think that the point you raise is extremely valid. We have to deal with it forward.
Very, very good. Particularly, I'll ask people who have not yet asked the question, if anybody who would like to speak and has not yet spoken. It could be a question, it could be a comment, it could be, well, one of those two. Otherwise, Gene, did you want to respond to that?
I just wanted to quote one of my favorite socialists, Eugene Debs, who after he was thrown in prison for speaking against the war, said something to the effect that the rich have always started the wars and the poor have always fought the wars. And I think and that's a good slogan, I think. And we also have many of my comrades in Peace and Freedom Party continue to make this effort. So that's unique to California, but it should be, and we have a candidate that's speaking quite effectively on those issues. But I'll shut up.
No, that's fine. And so it's a little bit past noon. Typically, we continue the Q&A until 12:30. But if there isn't any more questions, we can also terminate the meeting a little bit earlier than usual. But I would like to encourage people to ask questions, and if not, maybe open this up to a kind of a more open discussion, because there's been a lot of things that have been put out that I think are really fruitful areas for consideration. I mean, why is it that our Congress representatives are pro-war when the population is predominantly anti-war? And what do we do about that? So if there isn't any more questions, I think I would ask to open this up as an open discussion. Sometimes we have open discussions.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Niebuhr Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Niebuhr Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.